warbled a sweet song. The inhabitants of the place were of all sizes, which is nice for me because you compare me to Jeff. Jeff's probably a foot and a half taller than me, so this makes me feel like I got a chance. They bore the express image of Jesus, and their countenance beamed with the holy joy, expressive of freedom and happiness of the place. I asked one of them why there is so much more lovely than those on the earth, and the reply was, well, we've lived in strict obedience to the commandments of God and have not fallen by disobedience like those on the earth. And then I saw the two trees. One of them looked like the tree of life in the city, and the fruit of both looked beautiful, but one of them they couldn't eat. They had the power to eat both of them, but they were forbidden to eat one of them. Then my attending angel said to me, none in this place have tasted the forbidden tree, because if they should eat, they would fall. So that's kind of interesting that another planet someplace, had the similar situation that we had back in the Garden of Eden. Then I was taken to another world which had 7 moons. How cool is that? You go to Saturn or Jupiter and they've got more moons than we do, but 7 moons. And there I saw good old Enoch who had been translated. And what did he have? A tattoo. You going to go to heaven with a tattoo? I thought you were going to be changed in the twinkling of an eye. On his right arm he bore a glorious palm, and on each leaf was written the word victory. Around his head was a dazzling white wreath and leaves on the wreath, and in the middle of each leaf was another word written, purity. Around the wreath were stones of various colors that shone brighter than the stars and cast reflection upon those letters and magnified them. On the back part of his head was a bow that confined the wreath, and on this bow was written holiness. Above the wreath he had a lovely crown that shone brighter than the sun. I asked him if this was a place he had been taken from the earth, and he said, no, the city is my home. I've come here to visit this place. He moved about the place as if perfectly at home. I begged my attending angel to let me remain in that place because I could not bear the thought of coming back to this dark world again. Then the angel said, nope, you've got to go back. If you're faithful, you and the 144,000 will have the privilege of visiting all the worlds and viewing the handiwork of God. So that sounds pretty cool to me. I like the idea of being able to go visiting other worlds and see other beings and stuff. Again, I started out as a child. See this stuff? Gray hair, what little there is left of it. If you look at my lovely grandkids, they both have a big full head of hair, and they're healthy and they're young and they're not old. So Greg, if I hit this, is that going to give me... Go the other way. See the handsome Jack there crying his eyes out? That's me. I don't know, those of you who are about my age will remember back when you had Polaroid, Kodak cameras, that kind of stuff. They had those little round bulbs, and you stick them in and you got one flash out of it. And you had film in the camera, so your parents were wanting to get the shot right the first time because it's not like a digital where you could just shoot, trying to get a better picture. It was a one-shot deal. I hated the flash, so I would always cry every time we had to get a picture taken. Just didn't look good. Got another picture I'll show you, and I wanted to tell you how modern I am. Back in 1960, my grandma and her sister, Aunt Mabel, neither of which went to church, didn't have a religious upbringing, but they were pretty stressed at the presidential election that year. And you know why? A Catholic was running for president. They thought that was going to be the end of the world, that somehow Catholic Church is going to take over the world and that's not going to be a good deal. And they didn't even go to church, it wasn't a big deal. And they had been conservative Democrats, if there was such a thing nowadays. I don't think there is. I think Democrats have moved more towards socialism, or left-wing politics. So that was the first time anybody in my family had the audacity to vote against them. So they voted for that Tricky Dicky guy, that was running against Jack Kennedy. Didn't get elected, obviously. But that was the thrill. So over the years, society has become more woke. So I beat you to it. My family's got a long history of being cross-dressers. This is my great-granddad, John. Came over from Scotland in the 1880s, and he had a nice miniskirt that he wore. And I had a picture of him standing with a shotgun when he landed in Chicago, and I couldn't find it. I don't know where it is, so you're going to have to see the one where he left town. Basically, him and his brother Robert came to the United States in the 1880s, and John, the guy there in the picture, went on over to Illinois and got off a boat there in Chicago and then headed south down into Missouri, and that's where he settled, built a log cabin down there and started raising our family. His brother Robert went on to Australia and was never heard from again. I don't know if he died in a boat crash or lived there, and we just never heard anything about it. Anyway, great-granddad built a log cabin, and I remember going out and seeing it when I was a kid, and it was real close to the family funeral plot. So we had our own graveyard, it's got you coming and going. But in the graveyard, we had Blankenships and Dicksons and Owens and a couple other names, but it was pretty much those all just mixed together. So you would have different generations of the same names of cousins and stuff, but married. It's like going to a wedding and marrying your cousin or something. We had a lot of friendly family. My mom's clan came from Kansas. And when we were young, we actually lived up in Hoisington area for a while, but there are these little towns, Hoisington, Kansas, Shawnee, Kansas, Pawnee, Great Bend, Kansas City. So I remember growing up as a kid, there was a saying, if Great Bend had a baby, would Pawnee rock it? You have to think. So Great Bend was a city, Pawnee was a city, Hoisington, so on. It was just one of those things, that stuck in your head. So anyway, they moved on down to the Diggins-Seymour area, and that's where Mom and Dad met. My grandpa, my mom's dad, another Hammond, Bob Hammond, had seen the Adventist church and had actually gone a few times. But again, my grandma and her family weren't religious at all, but they did go to the Methodist church for a while. And then they moved from Kansas City down to Springfield area. And Grandma decided, after much pushing by Grandpa, well, let's put the kids in a church school. And by this time, my mom was a senior in high school, and her sister was a junior, and their little brother Bobby was probably like in the 8th grade or something like that. So they sent the 2 girls off to Sunnydale Academy, up towards Joplin area. So the one year that my mom was exposed to Adventists. Well, Dad went off to World War II right at the end of the war, and he was sent to Germany, and he had to load up, big truckloads of just corpses. And I remember one time Butch and my brother, were digging through pictures in a shoebox, in Mom and Dad's bedroom. We got in trouble for it, but here were just thousands, of bodies they were having to pick up. And if you can imagine, I don't know how long it had been since, the last battle had been fought, but those corpses had to be rotting and smelling and stuff. Dad never would, talk about, the war or the things that he had to go through. But during that time, he had met Mom before he went over there, so he was writing letters to her back home and came back home, and they got married. And then that picture you saw of us, there was 4 of us kids, 4 kids in 5 years. And so the family started. So my older sister, Virginia, is the oldest, then Butch or Ronald, then me, and then my sister, Kathy. Well, each generation had Johns, they had Bobs, and they had Keiths. So, the Dickson clan is from the clan of Keith in Scotland, so I ended up with Keith as a middle name. My uncle's a Keith, and my nephew's a Robert, and, we got Johns and all that stuff in the family. So those things are family tradition, which I'm sure each of you guys have got, but you are different than me. So is my tale the truth, or is yours the truth? I wonder about that sometimes, with religions. You think, when I was growing up in Adventist schools, went to Rogers School and then Walla Walla Valley Academy and Walla Walla College and Walla Walla Community College. Back then, you know, you used to hear a lot about don't be unequally yoked. And so a lot of that was inferred to who you married, and it was inferred to, you know, who are you going to hang out with? You know, you should probably hang with Adventists because that's what you are. You don't want to get corrupted, you know, by some of these other people. The best experiences in life, you know, was whenever I started getting into the workplace and in schooling and met people of value, you know, that were Baptists and Methodists and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Catholics and stuff. And you think, God can't be that discriminating that he thinks there's only this little pool of people over here that are my people and the rest of you, you know, can go to hell. And too often, you know, we limit God's interest and ability by narrowing his scope of things down based on our attitude. And, you know, and that's kind of a shame. Well, when I was in Springfield, we bought this little house down on, well, actually, I guess we didn't buy it. We were renting a little house on Nickel Street. And there was an Adventist church that was about the size of this over here, you know, that many rows and stuff. Judah, do you want to come up and give me a hand for a sec? Take this and wander down that front aisle there. Okay, slow down for a sec. Let me see where we're at. Oh, got to come back my way a bit. Okay, so stretch that tight. That's good, stop. So that was how long our church was, from the pulpit to the back door. And we actually had a foyer, you know, that was maybe 6 feet deep, and this went clear to the second door, 28 feet. Who cares about that? I care. It has to do with missionaries. So our pastor's name was Elder May, M-A-Y. Now he got married a woman whose first name was May. So it was Elder and Mrs. May, which, you know, made it easy as a kid to remember your pastor's name and his wife's name. Well, my parents were pretty smart too, so they named me Dick Dickson, you know, a lot of creativity. Anyway, twice during my life when we were at that church, we had a missionary come and speak it was a retired missionary actually from South America, Elder Hallowell. First name Leo, his wife was Jessie, and they had a son that was like my mom's age, you know, but he was old, you know, by that time. He was probably 45 or something, and his parents were probably 70. Anyway, Elder Hallowell would come and preach and tell us stories. He was like 19 years old, you know, moved to Idaho or somewhere around there and was working, I want to say doing logging or something like that. I can't swear to that for sure. But he would take his bicycle and ride several miles because there was this plant, you know, by a river that produced electricity. And this was, you know, maybe 1908, 1910, something like that. And you could see light and stuff without flames. You know, you didn't have to have a coal-fired lamp. You didn't have a kerosene lantern. You had this. So he would do that multiple times, go down and just thinking, man, when I grow up, I want one of those. You know, I want to be able to go power somebody's house or a city. Wouldn't that be cool? Well, he ends up meeting this nurse from Nebraska, and they got to talking and thinking, you know, how great it would be to be missionaries. Well, let's get married, let's go be missionaries. So they took off to South America. They get down there and they spend 2 years, and it was like, you know what? People down here don't speak English. You know, they speak something else. And, you know, my wife's a nurse. I'm not. You know, I'd sure like to be able to tell them about Jesus and stuff, but man, they just don't have the basics. They're living out here in the jungle and there's not much around. So they come back to the States and they take classes in herbology and gardening and, you know, life and health and how to treat illnesses in the jungle. And they decide, let's head back down. So they were taking Portuguese for 2 years. So they learned the language. They got back down to South America, and instead of going out in the jungle where they were at, they went to the Amazon. And at this time, Leo decided I've worked with wood before. I bet I could just build a boat. So he starts thinking in his mind, what am I going to do? So he designs a shallow river boat, kind of like they used to have on the Mississippi in the old days, something that you could float up on sandbars and not get stuck with a sharp bottom keel. And you know what he named it? Lucerio, light bearer, because he wanted to be able to bring light to, villages and stuff like that. And when Sandy and I had property over in Republic, we had a house over there. We met friends who had a ministry, just north of town up in Malo that was called Light Bearers Ministry. So it's kind of like weird that world circles back around, comes to this thing. So anyway, what does that have to do with the price of rice in China or the cost of wheat in Tibet? At church, this guy came twice, like I said, between maybe when I was 8 years old and again when I was about 10. And he stood back where Judah's at, and he slung this thing down the center aisle. And what in the world was it? It was a python skin, 28 feet long. Just gave me the heebie-jeebies. I'm thinking, I would hate to be a missionary. I bet it would be cool to go see something like that. Boy, I don't want to get eaten and swallowed by a snake. I'd sure like to be able to see what that looks like, though. And he spent, all of his ministry going up and down the Amazon River. His boat, you can come on forward, Judah, with this. His boat was so unique that the government of Brazil copied his plans for his boat and ended up making about 24 more boats, and they called them all Lucerio, light bearer boats. So even though, they weren't religious at that point, they were copying religious, information. And Leo was able to preach to the natives, and he would pull up, at one of their villages, and he would run a cord out, with lights and stuff, put a tent up there on the beach, and talk to them about life principles, health, safety, Jesus, the gospel. And then he would move on, and he was the light bearer, which I thought was pretty cool. I was thinking it would be interesting to do some of the things the missionaries did. And I suppose maybe in my bucket list in the back of my head, I always thought I'd like to go to Tierra del Fuego, the tip of South America. And I was able to do that once, got to go down. Missionary, what's a missionary? Somebody that goes and does stuff to help other people. Is it always preaching like a pastor? No. Sandy and I have supported drilling wells, in Africa and stuff, and that's one of the mission that, a group of people do, bring fresh water to people who normally would have to walk miles to get to a river to be able to have healthy, clean drinking water. So what's a mission? Back in '93, Sandy and I went with John Altman, over to Russia, to help do something physical. Physical meaning we put a roof on a gymnasium, that was a mission. That wasn't preaching the gospel, but it was doing something, that was beneficial to help provide a school to educate, the children in the area. So what does that have to do with the price of rice in China? Well, starting out, talking about Ellen White's vision and being able to see people on other planets throughout the galaxy and the universe. I truly believe that we're going to be able to, at some point, go wherever we want. And we're going to run into people that are going to be able to tell us their story of how for millions of years or whatever they've been faithful to God and lived the true right life that we would like to have. But every one of us in this room are sinners because we were all born into sin and we live on a sinful planet, so you've got no option there. You don't have the benefit of being able to even save yourself. Ken was talking about the chosen, and then this morning in Sabbath school we had Timothy Jennings talking about the brass serpent, out in the desert. Did God choose to punish the Israelites by sending them poisonous snakes to bite them and kill them? No, that's the native habitat of those snakes. Israelites just happened to be walking through that area while they're wandering for 40 years which they could have made a one trip straight across the desert if they would have been willing to listen to what God had to say. But God told Moses, tell you what, you see the snakes? Make one out of brass, hang it up on this pole, and stick it out in the middle of the people and tell them that if they just look on the snake, they'll be healed. And Aaron and the other Israelites are thinking, that just isn't rational. There's no reasoning thought into saying that a piece of metal is going to heal me. And Moses' thought was it has little to do with reasoning. It has nothing to do with rational thought. It has to do with faith. God says do it, just do it, and God's going to heal you. And, just like that, they would be healed. It wasn't anything that was practical. Now, my bride has a story to tell. Some of it may be true. I didn't hear Barb, querying her as to the truth. But we'll let her tell the story of how we ended up meeting and what happened after that.
Well, if any of you remember Paul Harvey, how many of you are in the same generation as me? This is the rest of the story. Where to begin my tale? I guess at the beginning. I was born to Harvard and Suzanne Brzee on August 21, 1955, which makes me a grandson of 66 years young as I sit before you today. So you don't have to worry about the math.
I'll let you have this for the right arrow.
2.5 years later, I became a big sister to Randy, my baby brother. He is still a treasure to me. And now that both of our parents are gone, it is he and I that share our childhood memories, and that's priceless. My birthplace was in Medford, Oregon. My dad had a dental practice for 40 plus years in the Rogue Valley, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom until my folks divorced in 1965. So that's yours truly.
She looked pretty sweet and innocent back then.
Yeah, back then. I was maybe a little bit of a ham even then. That's Mom reading us bedtime story. Randy and I are in our jams ready to go to bed. And then that's good old Easter, getting all dressed up in our finery and yeah. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom until my folks divorced in 1965. She became a teacher's assistant in the public school system until her death in 1984, which coincided with my own separation with my first husband. It was a tough year. I attended school at Rogue River Academy and then headed to Milo Boarding Academy to complete my high school years as a junior and senior. Those 2 years were like a breath of fresh air as I became my own person, making friendships, trying out leadership roles, and being more fully involved in my community as a free agent. I was pretty much on my own. I met my first husband there, and though we didn't connect more than a passing, hey, how are you? We became more acquainted when I turned 19 years old while trying to figure out my future. I had gone to Walla Walla College for 1 year as a freshman and gotten some of my general studies out of the way. But I felt like a small fish in a big ocean after having experienced the closeness of a smaller campus at Milo. I just was homesick. I was floundering and looking for some direction in my life. I returned to Medford and enrolled in Southern Oregon College located in Ashland, Oregon for 1 semester, but it wasn't a good fit. And my dad was very adamant about me finding a way to make a living wage for myself, thus encouraging me to find a career. Because I needed to do something, I enrolled in beauty school. During that time, I met up with Jerry Culver and we began to date. A year later, we were married and I moved to Salem, Oregon. I finished my cosmetology degree and became licensed in Oregon and then worked as a beautician in our early marriage until I was 6 months pregnant with Angie, my first baby. Hindsight is often 20/20. And being married at 20 years of age, thinking I had the wisdom of the ages, neither Jerry or I were prepared to weather some of the storms ahead. After 8 years of marriage and 3 babies later, I became a single mom. On Father's Day weekend, I became the sole caretaker of Angie, 4, Anthony, 2 years old, and Amy, 4 months old. That first year was such a painful year, and I often felt like I was living life in a daze, just putting one foot in front of the other, surviving. My babies kept me grounded, and though I wouldn't say I had a close relationship with God at that point, I do remember praying to Him for guidance as I moved forward. Did you know He answers our prayers whispered in the dark? When Tony was a few months old, I had enrolled at the local community college, Shemekada, to take a child development course and do a child observation class because I wanted to be a well-prepared mom. I wanted to do it right. Finding myself single a couple of years later, I wanted to plan a future that would allow me to support my family and still be with my kids. My dad and stepmom drove up from Medford in their motorhome the day I told them that my marriage was finished. Dad canceling his remaining patient appointments, then whisking me away from everything for that weekend. When I woke up that following Sabbath morning in the motorhome, I had the strong impression that I should attain an early learning education degree. That would give me the opportunity to have an in-house child development center, thus providing for other children as well as my own in an enriched learning environment. I applied for a Pell Grant, was awarded the grant, and for the next year and a half, went to college to earn my associate degree in early learning. When my mom passed that following November after our split, her will left me enough money to support my household while getting my degree. I mapped out how long that would provide for us and worked out my school schedule to be completed by taking 19 credits a quarter so that I would be finished at the end of winter quarter. Often I would try to study after putting babies to bed, and I would find myself falling asleep. So I started to go to bed when they went down, getting up at 4 a.m. to complete my studies. Interestingly enough, having been an average student growing up, I ended up on the dean's list. My focus was different. I was building a future for my family. While I was living life in the fast lane, a couple from my East Salem church, Judy and Bill Horde, wanted me to meet this guy on a blind date. Ugh. I put them off as long as I could. I had already been doing some dating, and with my schedule, I wasn't much interested in adding another guy into the mix. After several months of them encouraging us to meet, I figured, okay, I will just get this over with. Judy informed me that his name was Richard Dickson. He was a nursing home administrator, was divorced and had 2 daughters, Sarah, 7 years old, and Melissa, 6 years old. This is the picture that she shared with me at the time, trying to convince me that I should meet this dude.
I actually was younger at one point. I wasn't this old my entire life.
Oh, and that was my picture when I was a senior. Okay. To encourage Richard on the other end to agree to meeting me, they showed him a picture from the church directory of me as a bleached blonde and very pregnant. Can't figure why he hesitated on that one. It was decided that we would meet at church and then go to Judy and Bill's house for lunch afterwards. When I arrived at the church that morning, I started to think, this is the church family where my family had gone since Jerry and I were married and had our 3 babies and been part of the leadership team as deacon and deaconess. I'm not going to parade up in front of everyone and give them fodder for the gossip mill. I therefore sat in the back in the mother's room, and guess who thought they had been stood up? When the church service was over, I met the group out in the foyer, and the blind date began. Mind you, Richard had been about as enthusiastic as I had been to meet each other. He told his office staff that he was planning to meet me, grab a bite, and be back in Federal Way early afternoon. I just have to say that at midnight, after hiking, going out to eat, bowling, etc., he left my home to return to his place. Ha! Midnight. That following year, we dated long distance, which was a bit crazy, but after a couple of months of dating, Richard asked me to marry him, and I liked him enough to say yes. Love continued to grow, and a year later, from the day of our first meeting, we joined our families and our lives. I sold my house in Salem, and we moved lock, stock, and barrel to his home in Federal Way. That's our troop. So Amy was 2 years old, Tony was 4, Angie was 6, Melissa was 7, and Sarah was 8. It was a Brady bunch. That's the group of people that stood up with us, our buddies, and that was us 35 plus years ago. things have changed a little bit.
She was a keeper.
Many people over the years have been awed that Richard and I would take on a family of 5 kids to provide a place for them to grow. And though bringing 2 households together and building relationships can be dicey at times, we've been very blessed to have a cohesive and loving family. As with many families, we've had bumps in the road, some small, large and some small, and we've had to work through to the other side of a given misunderstanding. But this is one of the few treasures that we will carry into heaven with us, relationships with family and friends. It is well worth the investment of time and communication to resolve issues as they crop up. As a family, we have experienced so many wonderful adventures. Note the picture of our first backpacking vacation. Up by Ozette Lake, in the rainforest, 3-mile trek one way, carrying our own water, food, and tents. No potty, thieving raccoons, and the list goes on. This picture was before the fun actually started, and when I told my husband to send a helicopter to airlift me out at the end of the 2-day camp out, he knew that was probably the last backpack trip I would be taking. Richard and I teamed well together in planning bonding moments, and many Sabbaths started with a lovely Friday night meal or a yummy Sabbath morning breakfast, and Dad would have a plan to place in what to do that afternoon. That would include hikes, bike rides, car rides, up into the mountains, or skipping rocks and exploring for treasures next to the ocean, sometimes heading to Seattle's Alki Beach or Tacoma's Ruston Way. Summer vacations were done on a yearly basis, and road trips were a big part of our family culture. We were and continue to be blessed by our 5 kids who have made our life more fulfilling, blessing us with additional family members, in-law kids, 12 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild, as well as the support they have given over these last few years with Dad's illness. All of our children have done well in their career choices and are active members in their communities, making a difference for those they serve. We are so proud of them, and we love them so. When arriving to Federal Way, my first year as an early childhood educator, we used a basement room in our home to do a preschool 3 days a week. We had 8 students, which included 2 of our kids, and I had a chance to put into practice what I had learned in theory. While being in operation with my preschool, my cousins Ralph and Mary Lou Brzee knew I had moved up north and had earned a degree in early learning. Their daughter, Suzanne, was currently attending the Academy daycare located out on Auburn Academy's campus. Auburn Academy was contemplating closing the daycare after 2 years of service to the community, and it became an option for Buena Vista Elementary School to keep the program going. The Brzees shared my name as a possibility to be the acting director, and I ended up interviewing with the powers that be and became the new director, bringing along my name from my in-home preschool, Loving to Learn. I was the director there for 13 years. In 1998, I decided it would be advantageous for me to earn my BA in management, and so for 18 months, I attended Northwest College in Kirkland, an Assembly of God college, working full-time, heading up to Kirkland 1 night a week for an intensive 4-hour class. I ended up with my BA in organizational management in May of 2000. Richard kept the home fires burning as he supported me in my educational goals, since many of the evenings were used for studying as well as attending class. To celebrate my accomplishment, Richard took me on a road trip. And we landed in Cody, Wyoming for a night, taking in the rodeo there. Wild and crazy, huh? Yeah. Cowboys and cowgirls. Our kids kept growing and achieving their own goals, and it was a busy household. Sarah and Melissa lived on the other side of the state, so we had to be very intentional in visiting them and being a part of their lives. Holidays and summer vacations, along with weekends of traveling their direction, our family continued to bond and build connections. Just like all siblings, the kids fought, scrapped, and loved each other, but beware to anyone outside of the family if they picked on one of the members of this troop. The following year, I left my position as the director of the Loving to Learn Child Development Center to begin a business with hubby on picking up homes, refurbishing them to sell or rent. While Richard was working as a nurse 3 days a week to provide living expenses, the other days were used to update the houses and work on building an investment properties portfolio. Then 9/11 happened. I remember working on a project at one of our houses the day of 9/11 when all the airlines and planes had been grounded, and the silence that ensued was very eerie. At this point, we were not able to sell anything and we bottomed out financially. It was very scary times on many levels. When we began our business, I remember thinking to myself, well, a lot of good it did for me to work on my BA, since I don't really need it in this line of work. God knew better. After our business fell apart, we had to find a new direction for our careers. Richard became the manager for the emergency room up at Enumclaw for 15 years before retirement, and I landed a position as the coordinator for Head Start at the Franklin Pierce School District and remained there for the next 19 years. That position morphed to the coordinator of the new Early Learning Center as we grew and expanded our programs. I would not have been qualified for this position without my BA. So moving forward, our kids grew up, married, and had their own family. We have lived in 5 different houses over the years. We have experienced job changes and life changes. When Richard had been retired for about a year, he began to have severe back pain to the point that he wore a back brace to help support his back. Then he began to stumble and fall, losing 40 pounds in a matter of months due to being sick caused by extreme pain. Doctors were baffled, and after 10 days of being in the UW Medical Center in Seattle, the diagnosis was CIDP, chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, an autoimmune disease where the sheath around the nerves destroys itself, thus creating electrical jolts in his body. Richard's retirement dreams included riding across the U.S. on his BMW bike, traveling to the Holy Lands, hiking our property in Republic, working on building projects with each of our kids, and the list goes on. We shared many of these dreams for our future, and not knowing how this illness would affect us, we had to live life a day at a time and adjust goals as we moved forward. People often ask us how we are doing because of these challenges and adjustments. We as humans all have our story, and the joy and pain of that living affects all of us. Dealing with loss is universal if you live on this earth. A loss of a parent, a loss of a relationship, a loss of a marriage, a loss of job, career, a loss of home, a loss of finances, a loss of health and ability. I once asked Richard if he ever shouted at God in his pain when no one else was in the house. And my mild-mannered husband said emphatically, yes. God is not afraid of our emotions, questions, doubts, and fears, and sometimes our shouts. He wants us to draw to him for confirmation of his love and leading, and over these last few years, I have seen my hubby become more real with his Creator than ever before in our marriage. Listed are 7 stages of grieving for the pain that happens in our lives. Some people go through all the stages at different times in different order. Some hit a variety of these stages, but not all of them. Every stage is an individual thing, but we all grieve at times in our journey. In this process, we must give ourselves permission to do that grieving without the guilt that accompanies some of these stages. Feeling angry over our new reality has been a challenge for me, and guilt often accompanies that anger. I had to come to the understanding that this is a process needed as an opportunity to heal. Realistically, our heart falters in the midst of pain. The first one was shock, when you initially hear the bad news, denial, trying to avoid the inevitable, anger, frustrated outpouring of bottled up emotions, bargaining and seeking in vain for a way out, depression, final realization of the inevitable, testing, seeking realistic solutions, acceptance, finally finding the way forward. Also can be a cycle of where you think you're finished with a particular stage to only find yourself returning to that stage and processing it again. This too is normal. So what steps can be taken to work through to the healing? Well, of course, self-care, regular exercise, do what your body is capable of doing. Richard lifts weights to build on his arm strengths while he's sitting in his recliner. Getting good sleep, 7 or 8 hours a night, finding a new interest, hobby activity, developing new friendships, checking in with safe people for support, ones who will listen without judgment or criticism. Seek a support group that is experiencing a similar life story. And what about the spiritual component of humanhood? How does one work through these stages in a healthy way? Starting with an attitude of gratitude, thanking God daily for even the tough stuff one is experiencing. This opens our eyes to see the blessings mixed in with the challenges. Giving us hope for our future. Trusting beyond our feelings and not spending undue time trying to reason out our circumstances. There are things in our history, people, that we will not be able to understand until we see Jesus. But believing that our God is good all the time is what undergirds our faith. A mini miracle that took place over a year ago is the diminishing of Richard's pain, where his average pain level was an 8 out of 10 for the first couple of years, needing heavy medication to function. His pain has diminished significantly, and he has weaned himself off of many of the power-hitting drugs, which all carry negative side effects. In walking life out with God, Holy Spirit guides me to a better place when I struggle with my grief, redirecting me to His goodness. My life verses: seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you, Matthew 6:33. In the previous verses, Jesus is referring to the basic needs of what to eat, what to drink, what to wear, the basics of life. What will worry accomplish? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. Acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He will direct your path. Proverbs 3:5-6. The Lord your God is with you. He is mighty to save. He will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with His love. He will rejoice over you with singing. Zephaniah 3:17. In retrospect, I have become aware of glimpses when God revealed Himself to me. Driving to a Southern Oregon college in my dad's old 47 Ford, sensing a lovely presence. Looking out at a sparkling river that looked like diamonds as the sun reflected off the water. Soaking in the beauty of the landscape at our cabin on the mountainside in Republic. Seeing beauty in my children and my grandchildren's eyes. Experiencing a godlike spirit in friendships. And feeling the love of a brave and caring husband and life partner. Throughout my life, God has directed my path, often without me being aware of His leading. As I have looked back on my life, I see where Jesus walked through the tough times and guided my ways, loved me well, and entered into relationship with me. That builds my faith for what is before me and His plan for me. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. And
Okay,
that
Cisco.
is the rest of the story.
But the story continues. Look at this cutie pie coming up.
Hello. Letting go of every single dream. I lay each one down at your feet. Every moment of my wandering never changes what you see. I tried to win this war, I confess. My hands are weary, I need your rest. Mighty warrior, king of the fire. are my strength and comfort. You are my steady hand. You are my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand. Your ways are always higher. Your plans are always good. There's not a place where I'll go you've not already stood. When you don't move the mountains I needed you to move. When you don't part the waters I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. I will trust in you. I will trust in you.
Thank you, Cisco. So that's our baby granddaughter, Joella. She obviously didn't get her singing talents from me. So, we were talking about being missionaries. We're talking about the future. We're talking about giving our tales of who we are and how we relate to God, to the universe, to your fellow man. Phil and I were talking this morning, telling each other tales. It's intriguing to be able to see something totally opposite from how you experience God to sometimes seeing almost identical scenarios. The Bible is full of stories that way. Bible isn't being written continuing on now, but we are the future Bible that will be giving these stories to the universe. When I was a kid going to academy at Walla Walla Valley Academy, one day a week, I would go up to my buddy Chuck's after school, and we would watch Star Trek. Because, back then it came on once a week instead of every night, And when we were down there, we'd go down to my house and have dinner. Then when we were down there, we'd go to my buddy John's house and have dinner, because dinner at his house was always at 6:30. Dinner at Chuck's house was usually 4:35, and dinner at my house was somewhere in between the two. So every week we would have 3 dinners on that time. But you read in the Bible or you hear tales of raise up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. It is amazing the things that will stick with you from childhood to adulthood. Using Star Trek as an example, y'all remember Spock, live long and prosper? Where'd that come from? Leonard Nimoy, the guy that played Spock, was a Jew, raised, in New York in a Jewish family. Every Shabbat, he would go off to the synagogue, and the priests, the Kohanim, the descendants of the Levite tribe, would always end their blessing, their sermon, with the same way that Pastor John used to here, with the Aaronic blessing. So that's how we're going to end today. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. Go in peace, folks.